on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, why are Melbourne house prices going backwards? We'll have a look at New South Wales Liberal leader Mark Speakman's performance on the ABC. Was not impressive. Schoolgirls banned from school sports for refusing to compete against a male identifying as a female. We have a stellar lineup of guests tonight, including the great Douglas Murray, Darren Grimes and Stephanie Bastian. And as always, Lefties losing it.
I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill?
Could they get any more hysterical? Let's bring in Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs. Daniel, let's start in Melbourne. Property prices are stalling, with nearly every other capital city overtaking Melbourne in terms of monthly growth. Indeed, monthly growth went backwards in Melbourne and the annual growth is just 1.1%. Now, some will try to look at this in a positive light. They'll say housing prices in Melbourne are getting more affordable, but that's a fairly simplistic take on this issue. Explain why.
Well, it is simplistic. This is an impending sign of economic collapse. And the reason for that is demand is still getting pumped up with mass migration into Melbourne. So it's not as if, yes, if they had to cut numbers coming into the city, sure, you'd say this is alleviating housing affordability, maybe a positive sign. But this is being driven fundamentally by two key things. The first is the massive cost associated with the construction of housing, so investors are not getting in there. And secondly, the general economic circumstances, whether it's taxes or regulation. We know businesses are leaving the state in record numbers. It's the only state in Australia with a negative outflow of new businesses. So they know what's coming down the pipeline. People are leaving, investors are leaving because of the tax that is coming on, property investors. So this is a very worrying sign for the future economy in Victoria.
Oh, absolutely. And we know landlords are selling. There was a report in the Herald Sun, 1 in 4 landlords had sold a property in a single year. And those property taxes, the soaring land tax, the stamp duties, and that's just going to add further pressure to the rental crisis. That's one way to look at this, is that, yeah, you might think it's better for first home buyers, but really, if you're looking at the rental market, the rental pool is diminishing. And for most Australians, their property is their biggest asset. So if property prices go backwards, you're disadvantaging the bulk of the community.
Well, that's right. And I think it gets to this point, which is, well, what's next? So you've got this tax on investors. There's an uncertain investment in climate. We know that dozens of new taxes have been brought in by this government. You've got the massive cost overruns of these public infrastructure programs, which is sucking workers and sucking resources out of the private economy into these infrastructure programs. So I think people look at the state of the Victorian economy and they say, well, if they're going to change the rules midway through the game, what are they going to do next?
As for the federal government, Treasurer Jim Chalmers is putting the final touches on the budget. It's anticipated that some of Labor's mates are going to do very nicely out of this. Australian reveals 2 Labor-linked tech firms employed by a US-based private tech business managed to funnel nearly $1 billion of taxpayer money into building a quantum computer in Brisbane. It's reported that Brookline advisory lobbyists, Lydia Ivansky, who was Richard Miles's chief of staff, and Jared Richardson, who was Jim Chalmers' communications director, were key players in securing the government equity and loan packages. We're not suggesting any wrongdoing here, but Dan, this does pose the question, what are the details of the government's selection process? Just the pup test here is a little bit icky.
Well, it's a big issue. I mean, first, it's hypocrisy. I mean, Labor talks about transparency, integrity. They set up the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Well, if anything should be referred to that, surely it's this. The second point to make is we are getting a glimpse of what our country will be like under the Made in Australia program. It's going to be about picking winners, but who are the winners? It's not based on their economic performance or their commercial viability. It'll be companies that give money to Labor or who are related to Labor, former staffers and so forth. So This is what happens when you have a massive government takeover of the economy. The resources go to their mates, not to what's in the economy's interests.
Well, and you're also going to create a new industry of lobbyists, you can imagine. We've got enough of them, but we're going to get a lot more if this sort of money is there for the taking. We're talking about considerable sums, and I think if we're going to do this, we need to have complete transparency around the selection process. So it is beyond doubt, and there's public confidence at least.
There's only two growth industries in Australia, the NDIS and Labor lobbyists.
Both very profitable for some. Now, the wets in the Liberal Party keep getting wetter. You've got New South Wales Opposition Leader Mark Speakman. This performance on Q&A, I've got to say, was bordering on bizarre. He is effectively here denouncing his own party's nuclear plan.
Most experts will say that it's at least 15 or 20 years before you could get a nuclear facility up and running in Australia. We can't wait for nuclear, so in the meantime, here in New South Wales, we should be going ahead with our electricity roadmap, which will have heavy reliance on renewables.
And of course, Chris Bowen, Energy Minister, leapt on this. He tweeted out that little video I just played for you to all his followers on X. And he also said Peter Dutton and the federal opposition are the only ones who don't think a risky nuclear plan is wrong for Australia. I mean, what is Mark Speakman doing, Dan? Is he trying to be more inept, more clueless than his Victorian counterpart, John Pursuta? I really don't understand. If you're going to go on Q&A, then why would you go there and try to appease that audience with that sort of nonsense?
Well, exactly. You're right to mention the Victorian opposition, but you could add the Queensland opposition, the South Australian opposition. There is no alternative vision that is being provided by state opposition when it relates to energy. Even the New South Wales Labor government has seen the writing on the wall and said we need to keep Eraring open, the coal-fired power station. So they've admitted that renewables don't work. They've got to keep the coal stations open. The most concerning comment to me from Mark Speakman was saying that we have to accelerate the renewables rollout. Has he looked at Victoria? 500,000 homes were blacked out in Victoria because of the net zero policy here. We've gone harder and faster than any other state. And I just think the people of New South Wales are looking for an alternative and they're not getting it.
No, and you know what? We need an alternative. We need just clear choice at the ballot box. I think that's what's the worst thing here, that we go to these elections, we're obliged to vote or we're going to get fined. And often you have two main parties with almost identical policy positions on the key issues. And certainly that was the case in Victoria, and we saw how well that worked out for the Victorian Libs. Do you think they would learn from the Vic Libs and the WA Libs, what happened there? Now, let's quickly touch on this. We've got a lot of money going into the education sector, but we're still seeing teachers leaving education sector in huge numbers. There's all sorts of incentives to get new teachers into the program, but experienced teachers are leaving in droves. In New South Wales alone, more than 2,000 quit last year. Even bigger numbers in Queensland, with more than 2,500 leaving, more than 3,000 in Victoria. What's the underlying issue here, Dan? And should we have some sort of a performance pay component for teachers to try to keep the good ones? The good ones can get paid significantly more, but then we're not rewarding the mediocre ones because they both exist.
Well, I think that's right. I think there's three key causes here. The first is that the curriculum is totally cluttered with woke nonsense. So a lot of good teachers just want to teach the basics and they can't because of the national curriculum. The second reason is the red tape and the bureaucracy. I mean, the amount of paperwork that teachers have to deal with is insane. It takes them away from the classroom, away from their passion of teaching. And the third issue is behaviour. There's a serious behavioural problem in classrooms. It has to be said, students and parents often problems. We and teachers cannot discipline students. They're not allowed to impose discipline in a way that would bring order to the classroom and enable a safe, proper teaching environment. Those are the issues that need to be addressed.
And I think the teachers' unions carry a lot of the blame for just the ideology in this sector. And we don't have teacher-led learning. We've got student-led learning, and that is just a recipe for disaster. Now, let's go to the US. Donald Trump is accusing the New York judge overseeing his hush money trial of trying to rig the 2024 presidential election. Yesterday, Judge Merchant ruled Trump violated a gag order that bans him from speaking publicly about witnesses and family members of court officials. But just look at who the star witness of this sham trial is: Michael Cohen, a criminally convicted fraudster and a serial perjurer, according to a federal judge. He has also been trying to cash in on this Trump trial in bizarre TikTok live streams, earning donations from people for saying things like Trump 2024, more like Trump 20 to 40 years, As for the judge, his daughter, a political consultant, has profited greatly from this trial, helping her Democratic clients raise $93 million in donations using this case in her solicitation emails. Yeah, that sounds completely kosher. Yet Trump's got a gag order. He can't talk about all this. Well, he may have a gag order. He may be prevented from campaigning in those crucial swing states. That's where he needs to be right now, not sitting in a courtroom. But he can still release ads like this.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
That's quite a good strategy there. You got a gag order, release 30-second ad like that. Gets the message across.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason the Democrats are doing this, and we've seen it with them trying to take him off the ballot, is because he's popular. They know they can't beat him in a fair fight. So that's why they're going to great lengths to, as you say, stop him from campaigning. A lot of Americans look at this, and there's a lot of people that don't like Trump for various reasons. They say, well, hang on, we live in a democracy. He is the candidate. He needs to be allowed to campaign. He needs to be on the ballot. I'm really concerned what might happen in America if this continues, where his supporters, we know there's tens of millions of hardcore Trump supporters, if they keep making this an unfair fight, and if he can't campaign in a proper way, I worry about how much more divided American society is going to become.
Well, the trust in the justice system there is at record lows, and for good reason. Now, let's quickly have a look at this. Succession star Brian Cox, he was brilliant in that series, but he's gone on quite a rant this week on a podcast, slamming humanity as stupid, religion as horror, and the Bible as one of the worst books ever. He said human beings are effed, basically, because they're so stupid. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't say anything in response to this, but you would think a 77-year-old, Dan, who identifies as a socialist, the doctrine of envy and failure that has resulted in so much human suffering around the world, would refrain from calling others stupid, wouldn't you?
You think so, and he's a socialist, but he's happy to take the money from capitalism.
A millionaire socialist, aren't they all? Dan Wilde, thank you so much for your time this evening. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been accused of being all talk and no meaningful action when it comes to tackling domestic violence. You can have all the talk fests and emergency cabinet meetings, but as criminologist Michael Salter explains, alcohol, pornography and gambling are clear accelerants to men's violence. He said, why is it the responsibility of a 13-year-old boy to change the culture around sexual violence when it's not the responsibility of an adult man earning millions of dollars a year promoting violent pornography to a teenage boy? Joining me now is Stephanie Bastian, Research Fellow at the Women's Forum Australia. We have a very well-funded activist class, Stephanie. Their impact is questionable. But what concrete steps is the Prime Minister taking to tackle this crucial issue and reduce the rates of violence?
Well, it seems out of the National Cabinet meeting today, there's been talk that potentially they are looking at bringing in age verification for children accessing pornography online. If this is the case, this is a very good thing. The government has been resisting this since the Commissioner made the recommendation last September. Obviously, parents are responsible for their children, should be watching what their children are doing at home, but sometimes pornography makes its way into schools and minors can't walk into sex shops. They shouldn't be able to access this content online. It's there for their protection. Other measures, putting money into support and services for women, obviously very important as well, but we have a big problem, Rita, because we have a government who can't define what a woman is. So it's all very well pouring money into domestic violence services for women when men can access them. So I think the government needs to have a look at this and address this rather urgently, because it's a big problem. And having gone to many rallies, the closest I've actually been to violence from a male is at these from trans rights activists at these rallies. And these are the people that want to access our private spaces. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed.
Well, what role does pornography and alcohol and gambling play in violence against women?
They all play a significant role. I mean, we do have a culture of drinking in this country. Drinking should be within moderation. Gambling, obviously, we have widespread advertising and promotion of it, and we know that it can lead to economic issues for women, poverty, homelessness, particularly when it comes to domestic violence, and pornography. 90% plus of scenes depict violence against women. It is absolutely wrong that we should have this widespread promotion support for the sex industry. It needs to be addressed because it harms women. And while it is being normalised by adults, how can we expect children to stay away from it? So these are all cultural issues we need to address collectively instead of ignoring them and sweeping them under the carpet.
Now, the UK's National Health Service, the NHS, will be forced by the Health Secretary to completely break away from much of the gender ideology they have embraced in recent years. They will be banned, not discouraged, banned from using gender-neutral words like chest feeding, ovaries owner and people who menstruate. The updated constitution of the NHS will also ban the treatment of transgender women, that is biological men, in female-only healthcare environments. This is a dramatic break, Stephanie, from the radical trans activism that was instituted in the NHS. How long until such change happens in Australia?
It's hard to tell, Rita. I mean, our political leaders and health regulators currently have their heads in the sand. The message from them is that either the Cass review doesn't apply or Australia is doing something very differently. I think their response shows that not only do we need an inquiry into the health treatments used on children with gender dysphoria, we also need to investigate how ACON and many of these lobby groups have such immense power. They've managed to shut down further discussion. It's very concerning. A lot of these organisations are tax funded. But perhaps worst of all, kids are being harmed, and that harm is continuing. And so we need to have an inquiry as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Now, 5 female athletes, middle school students from West Virginia, have been banned from future athletic competitions for refusing to compete against a male identifying as a female. When hearing that have to compete against a biological male, each of the girls took turns refusing to throw the shot put in protest. I can't believe this response, Stephanie. We have been saying it's up to female athletes to take a stand against this madness, to not tolerate the unfairness. These young women have done that and they're being punished for it.
It is absolutely outrageous, Rita. I mean, you have women standing up for themselves. This response is completely misogynistic. What I was pleased to see, though, is the Western Virginian Attorney General is now going to represent these girls and take the board to court. I haven't seen that bravery in Australia. I can't imagine our Attorney General doing that, or any of the shadows for that matter, unfortunately. But it is very heartening to see that response, and I hope that that can be amplified around the world.
Stephanie Bastian, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rita.
Still to come, the brilliant Douglas Murray on the International Criminal Court's relentless pursuit of Benjamin Netanyahu. And as always, your favourite segment, Lefties Losing It. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Douglas Murray coming up in a second, but now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And where would this segment be without the ladies of The View and their chronically clueless, always spectacularly stupid takes on everything? Take it away, Whoopi.
I would caution the media to be very careful about what they're doing and how they're handling this, because what they seem to be doing is pushing a narrative that people are pushing against, which students are pushing against, which I'm thrilled to see, because I like when students get mad and say, we want a change made.
You know, it's time Karen Elaine Johnson stopped appropriating a Jewish name. She's not Jewish and she has no Jewish ancestry. And let's not forget her rather disgraceful comments about the Holocaust just being about white-on-white violence. And it wasn't just her, it was Sunny Hostin as well, standing with these campus thugs.
The students that I have spoken to at many of the Ivy League schools, and a student that I did speak to also at Emory, where a professor was thrown to the ground simply for asking the police, what are you doing to these peacefully protesting students? The students are telling me this is a humanitarian crisis.
Of course, she has no idea. Sunny, that professor was thrown to the ground because she hit an officer on the head, which she admitted to as she was led away in handcuffs. Yeah, she was stupid enough to admit to that on camera. And let's check in with one of these brave student protesters from an Ivy League college that costs upwards of $70,000 a year US. Here is one of these students, and she's asked, why should Columbia be required to feed students who have illegally taken over a facility? Listen to this rather demented answer.
Well, first of all, we're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here.
But you mentioned that there was a request that food and water be brought in, unless I misunderstood.
To allow it to be brought in. I mean, well, I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic, I mean, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
She goes from demanding Columbia feed her and her ilk to claiming they are stopping them from purchasing their own food and water and having it delivered. When she's reminded that they've put themselves in this predicament, she comes up with a whole new story.
But they did put themselves in that very deliberately, in that situation and in that position. So it seems like you're sort of saying, we want to be revolutionaries, we want to take over this building. Now would you please bring us food and water?
Nobody's asking them to bring anything. We're asking them to not violently stop us from bringing in basic humanitarian aid.
They're stopping the delivery of food?
We are looking for a commitment from them that they will not stop it violently.
They haven't stopped it yet.
Well, I don't know to what extent it has been attempted, but we're looking for a commitment.
That is a Columbia student, a PhD candidate, no less. She's supposed to be one of our brightest minds, but she's quite clearly as thick as a brick, but a lot less useful. Now, let's look at some of these college kids from the University of South Florida. First clip, they're acting all tough. They're saying there that they are united, they will not be divided. But watch what happens within 10 seconds, literally 10 seconds of the cops rolling in.
The people united will never be divided, defeated. This is what we mean. That is right, that is right. Everyone from the river to the sea.
They're not too united there. That was much easier than everyone expected. Well, that's how they handle things in Florida, but in lefty heartland, California, the violent mobs rule. Look at this independent journalist. They're harassed, they're intimidated, and this poor guy also had his property stolen by these charmers.
Stop pushing me! Stop pushing me!
You're restricting my movement right now. This is false incarceration. This is false incarceration. I'm allowed to be in here. I'm a journalist, credentialed. Okay, this is public property.
Oh, hey, lock arms, lock arms.
Oh, here we go.
Apparently, no free press here exists.
We don't allow aggressive media.
Joining me now is author of international bestsellers, including his latest, The War on the West, Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with this bit of fun featuring US Vice President Kamala Harris and Hollywood actress turned TV host Drew Barrymore.
Been thinking that we really all need a tremendous hug in the world right now. But in our country, we need you to be Mamala of the country.
Your response, please.
God, it's grotesque, isn't it? America doesn't need a mom. It doesn't need a mom figure. It needs an effective president and vice president. Kamala Harris has been tasked whilst in office with a number of very important roles, such as securing the southern border, and that would secure American moms across the country. She wasn't able to do that. And so now we have this kind of mouthwash from the Democrat supporters in the celebrity class who pretend that actually Kamala Harris, who can't do the jobs that she was assigned to do, will do a job that nobody could perform and nobody should perform.
Well, it is the most cringy bit of footage I think I have seen all year. And unfortunately, I see a lot of cringe footage, so that tells you something. Now, let's get to more serious stuff. You wrote a superb piece on the war on our civilization. You note that ours is possibly the first civilization in history that is taught to despise everything that is ours and venerate anything that is not. Tell me what the BBC have done. What have they done in this regard?
Well, Kenneth Clark, Lord Clark, did this extraordinary series, many viewers will know, in the 1960s called Civilization. It's a 12-part series, and astonishing. It's called Civilization, A Personal View. And it's an astonishingly erudite and informative and entertaining series in which Clark gives this amazing panorama of the dawn of Western civilization right up to the present, and then gives his own thoughts about that for the first time in the whole series. It's a magnificent work of television. Most people regard it as being, the gold standard in certainly in educational, informative programming. It's being reissued at the moment. And the BBC's done a couple of things. One is it's given effectively trigger warnings, saying that the series betrays attitudes that are of its time, and which is such a banal thing to say. I mean, everything has the attitudes of its time to some extent. What's the point of saying it? And the other thing it did was to commission Mary Beard, the left-wing academic, to do a sort of framing of it beforehand, in which she, among other things, criticized Kenneth Clark's work for being too Eurocentric. And as I pointed out in the Telegraph, this is such an uninsightful and such a banal accusation itself. Of course, somebody from Britain or Europe is likely, first of all, to look at the world through the eyes that they have. I mean, it'd be very strange if Kenneth Clark had done a series called Civilization, which was centered on looking at Chinese culture through the eyes of a Korean. I mean, it's of course there'll be some extent to it. I mean, everybody sort of reflects the culture they're from to some extent. But of course, it's not just that. It's the accusation that anything Eurocentric, Western-centric is somehow especially bigoted. And as if we'd be better off if we all looked at the world through African eyes or something like that. And of course, it's to forget the fact that one of the remarkable things that Kenneth Clark shows in his series is the way in which Western civilization not just succeeded, but why it succeeded and how it did so, by the skin of our teeth, as he says in one episode. None of it is simply sort of resting on laurels or anything like this. It just shows such a fantastically inane desire, as I said in that piece once again, to always celebrate something if it's not ours, but if it's ours, you have to denigrate. You know, if it's Western civilization, you've got to do it down. You know, celebrate the great mosques, don't celebrate the great cathedrals, and so on.
I do wonder whether other cultures are behaving in this manner. Well, I know the answer. They're not. And it just seems to be suicidally stupid to go down this road. Why would you behave like this? And you also note that the government's own counter-terrorism advisors a few years ago, they had a list of books and television programs that if you owned those, you know, it could be a sign that you were radicalised at some point. And Kenneth Clark's Civilization was on that list. C.S. Lewis was on that list. And, of course, your books are on that list. And what does that say about the attitudes? And this is a Tory government, and this is their terror experts coming up with this nonsense.
I know. I mean, you put your finger on it there, Rita. I mean, you know, 14 years of Conservative government and that sort of thing still happens. Yes, Lord Clark's Civilization was on the list of suspicious items that somebody might own. I was very proud to be on the list along with Kenneth Clark, C.S. Lewis, A.R.R. Tolkien. I think it was, as so often, the banned list was the only list you'd want to be on. But I mean, no, but I mean, it's serious because it is a reminder of this fact that some of these sort of so-called radicalization and counterterrorism sort of experts have drawn a line around our civilization, which is far, far too close in to the heart of the civilization. I mean, if you want to designate somebody a potential Islamic extremist, you better have all your ducks in the row. You better have all of your evidence to hand, and so on. But if you just want to say somebody is a sort of nationalist extremist or something like that, all they got to do is to like have some of the great works, which I'm excluding mine, but I mean some of the great works of literature in the canon. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Kenneth Clark. The idea that this should be suspicious, no, ownership of such things should be celebrated. This is some of the best thought and creative work that we've produced. And why do we, instead of celebrating it and in fact sort of drawing these suspicious lines around it, why do we not venerate it? Why do we not celebrate it and say to people, if you'd like to be part of this civilization and you want to contribute to it, you're welcome to. It's not just for one group of people, it's for everybody. But no, we can't seem to do that. So we have to do the chest beating, we have to do the self-flagellation, and we have to do the destruction in the end of everything that's best.
Now, you also wrote this week about the International Criminal Court, which is hell-bent on accusing Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of war crimes. What will be the impact if this eventuates, if a war crimes case is brought against a democratically elected leader? And also in Israel, the key Middle East ally of America, Australia, Britain?
Yes, it's extremely serious. I mean, I very much hope that it doesn't go ahead. But I know that Prosecutor Khan at the ICC is trying to push for personal prosecutions against the Prime Minister Netanyahu, against the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and probably the head of the IDF. Of course, there are several things that are appalling about this. One is that this is being done without any fresh investigation and with no new evidence or anything like that. It's a political prosecution, attempted prosecution. The second thing is that this would be the first time that the ICC at The Hague would have come from a democratically elected leader. And I believe that that is an extraordinary step. There are some people trying to use The Hague to get Vladimir Putin. I mean, it's deeply symbolic. I mean, good luck getting him out of the Kremlin and into The Hague. But, Putin runs his country as an unelected dictator. He goes through a farce of elections every now and then. But to go for a democratically elected leader, and in a country with a citizen army, a head of the army, would be extraordinarily unwise. And one reason it would be unwise is that I think that the ICC will once again destroy its own legitimacy. I'm not a big fan of the ICC. I don't think that Britain, Australia, America, I don't think we should be signatories to these things. I don't think that any foreign court should judge our elected leaders or our soldiers. That's for our military, that's for our governments, and indeed that's for the people. There are some people, particularly Republicans, who have in recent years started to think that the ICC is a useful tool. If the ICC brings this case against Netanyahu and others in Israel, it will be a very significant shot in the foot for that institution, because they will turn potential friends into enemies. So we'll see. It might be headed off this week. If it goes ahead, expect kerosene to be thrown over the fires that are burning, and sometimes literally, but that are burning in American college campuses and in Western cities. All of those malcontents and maniacs and others will think they have the best possible excuse to go and riot and shout and gibber and hound down Jews more than they have been already.
And it will set a dangerous precedent as well, I think. Douglas, before you go, you completed a documentary. I don't know where you find the time, but this is a really important issue that gets overlooked too often. It's America's drug crisis. And you say in the name of compassion and progressive politics, we're seeing a very permissive attitude to drug use with some devastating impacts.
North America now has the highest rate of opioid use of any region in the world.
You go to a spot like this, they give you a shot of fentanyl in the morning, and you come in the night and they give you a shot of fentanyl at night. Fentanyl.
Fentanyl takes the life of an American every 5 minutes.
Immediately that she had been poisoned with fentanyl.
Fentanyl is now found in recreational drugs like cocaine and even weed. With hundreds of thousands of Americans dying every year, the question remains, how did we get here?
Douglas, how did we get here?
It's astonishing. I urge people to watch the documentary. It's only just under half an hour long. It's an astonishing story, Rita. I mean, the fentanyl crisis has exacerbated the existing American drug crisis, but you know, this is now leading to almost 110,000 overdose deaths a year in the US. And that by any normal routine should be regarded as being an epidemic that has to be cracked down on. The short answer is the ease of the drug supply and the lethality of the drug supply. Mainly in America, the culprits are Chinese-made synthetic opioids, which come through Mexico. And it's true that some of the Mexican cartels seem to be able to make these synthetic opioids themselves now as well. But it means that the drugs that are making their way onto the American market are infinitely stronger in their potency and their potential lethality than any drugs that have made their way onto the open market before. And you just see in city after city, I mean, I concentrated particularly on New York and Philadelphia. I could have done any number of cities in the US, sadly. You just see sites that, I mean, I've not seen outside of war zones. And, you know, I just, you know, I say it's not a partisan documentary. It's just a desire to say to Americans and others, just wake up. Don't think this is normal. It's not normal. It's not normal. You should be losing so many of your citizens to these horrific, addictive and potent drugs. So yes, I urge people to watch it, but it's pretty tough viewing.
It's tough viewing, but important. And I would urge people to have a look. You can see the full documentary on X and YouTube. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great pleasure to see you as always, Rita. Thank you.
Still to come, Darren Grimes on the downfall of Scotland's First Minister, go woke, go broke, and why Prince Harry feels safer in Nigeria than he does in his homeland. That's after this. welcome back. Joining me now is GB News host Darren Grimes. Darren, the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, well, he resigned this week after just over a year in office. What can be said about his reign? It was short. It certainly wasn't sweet. What brought him undone in the end?
Oh, well, Rita, I'm like the cat that got the cream today, I'll tell you that much, because has been useless. He was the trans self-ID supremo. I've been on this show before discussing that. And actually, Rita, his pronouns are now ex, former and past, which is absolutely glorious. And I'm delighted because for a simple reason, right? I'm grateful to him for, he is, as you mentioned, the second shortest serving Scottish First Minister in history. And he actually revealed to the world that in progressive politics, racism is real, right? All too real. But it's anti-white racism. Because his infamous anti-white speech in which he stood up in the Scottish Parliament and waxed lyrical about how there are too many white people in posts of power in a country that is overwhelmingly white, as if that's a surprise to all of us. That's what he'll be remembered as. He'll be triggered to actually learn, Rita, that the colour of his severance slip is indeed white. He is a useless hate crime aficionado. You know, he has wasted countless oodles of police time and resources on trans self-ID hate crimes and all these other things. He allowed a double rapist to access a female-only prison. He built a ferry, Rita, where it went absolutely nowhere and had painted-on windows on the taxpayer, I kid you not. And he had an obsession, fundamentally, he had an obsession not with Glasgow, but with Gaza. This is a man that stood up in Pakistan and he announced he is a son of Pakistan. Then when he's in Scotland, he announces he's a son of Scotland. It wouldn't be anywhere else. He is an identity politics obsessed clown.
And he's been the subject of many hate crime complaints himself, and partly for that speech, that infamous speech he gave, pointing out all the white people in different positions. Now, let's talk about human rights activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a brave woman, a brilliant woman. I've had her on this program. She's written a really powerful piece for the Daily Mail on terrorism, the growing Islamist threat in Europe. Salman Rushdie, she wrote, "The valour of Churchill and Rushdie has been absent all too often in the West. Denial and delusion have been our watchwords. Capitulation has been dressed up as social inclusion. The pathetic impulse to appease has allowed Muslim extremism to flourish in our midst." It's a timely piece, Darren, and it's a message we have heard previously, and every time we hear it, we also hear the cries of Islamophobia.
Absolutely. Hirsi Ali is absolutely right. Brilliant, brilliant woman, brilliant piece. We've been utterly supine, frankly, and we've been more accommodating to the threat that lives among us than that comedian from Netflix's Baby Reindeer program, right? To that stalker. Because we've got to remember, Rita, that in Britain especially, 3 years on, we have a teacher that's still in hiding and may never return, because he showed a cartoon of Muhammad in a religious education class. Now, another big concern this year, we have a general election in Britain at some point this year, and we've brought about the introduction of voter identification, a really simple, important thing, no different to picking up a parcel from the post office, for example. And the big concern with voter ID, Rita, isn't actually the disenfranchisement of voters or anything like that. It's about women wearing face coverings, being forced to unveil themselves and requiring a female to actually verify them, as if that's a reason, Rita, to forego protection of the ballot box. that's just one example of a constant slew of them. We had an example most recently where a prayer ban in schools was judged to be potentially unlawful, and we spent £500,000 in British taxpayer money actually bringing that case to court. Thankfully, it lost. But I'm sick of the appeasement, because as our freedoms are increasingly diminished, we live in fear of attending Ariana Grande concerts for fear of our children being blown up. We have young girls live in fear of being raped and accused of racism if they speak up. And we see our capital city most recently celebrate Ramadan, but not Easter. The attack, and I think Hirsi Ali is absolutely right here to mention the attack on Salman Rushdie for speaking up 3 decades ago in his book, The Satanic Verses, being a reminder of where inaction actually gets a nation. Because how much has actually changed, Rita, in those 3 decades? We've allowed rampant anti-Semitism to grow and fester through Islamism. We've abandoned our principles, those that are supposed to define us, those that our ancestors fought and died for. And what will Britain look like in 3 decades' time? I really hope, with all of my heart, actually, that it isn't a shrug of the shoulders as we speak about, freedoms that we once had or enjoyed, but we were too utterly pathetic to defend, because that's the trajectory we're on. In Germany, over recent days, we've had calls to create an Islamic caliphate called for on the streets. And there's a shrug of the liberal shoulders saying, oh, well, we're a liberal, tolerant society. We've got to let this happen. No, we do not have to let this happen. We have to be robust in standing up and saying, this ain't how we do things in the West.
Now, let's talk a little Prince Harry. We've neglected him, Darren. We used to talk about him all the time, but you and I have not talked Harry. He is going to be coming home to the UK next week. It's 10 years of the Invictus Games, so he will be attending. Do we know if Meghan's coming, if the kids are coming? Of course, he lost that police protection in the UK, and he's said he doesn't feel safe bringing his wife and family to the UK. But, they were in Nigeria a few weeks ago. They felt safe there. Surely they will be with him for this trip.
No, apparently People magazine report that Miss Markle will not return to Britain, and Britain sighs a massive sigh of relief. Yes, I know, how terrible, Rita. How will we ever sleep at night? She's only interested in Nigeria, now you mention it, because guess what? She found a way to make the African nation all about her, because she found out that she had some historic connection through her ancestors of being of Nigerian descent. Now, at last year's Invictus Games tournament, Harry and Meghan were given this commemorative plaque thing from Nigeria's chief of defence, right? And it read, she was given a nickname, and this nickname said something to the effect of, it called her a legendary warrior princess and said she was blessed and a royal wife. Oh. Well, I hate to break it to Nigeria, but she ain't a royal wife. She gave all that up because she thought it was too difficult. Such a warrior princess she is, Rita. I mean, how utterly pathetic. Well, it's absurd, because this is a D-list actress that decided she's too good, right, for charity galas and public duties, now saying that she has some link to the Nigeria, in the same way that the president of the United States, Joe Biden, says he has a link to Ireland. Well, if you go through my history, I would have a link to Ireland, as many people do, because the Irish ended up here, there and everywhere. But I don't bleat on about it every 2 seconds. It's this obsession with identity politics.
Darren, maybe you should be going across to Ireland and getting declared some sort of a, I don't know, what was it? A warrior prince you could be in Ireland. A warrior prince,
yes, I could.
The titles Meghan has collected, the awards she's collected in the last couple of years, we should actually do a segment on that, because there have been some impressive titles that some of them she's bestowed upon herself, but some have been given to her by people silly enough to think attaching their award to her will give it some sort of credence. It doesn't. Darren Grimes, always a pleasure. Thanks for your time this evening.
Pleasure, Rita. Thank you.
That's it from me. Up next is Newsnight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.